The concept of a third world war has haunted the minds of policymakers, security researchers, and the public for decades. In the modern geopolitical context, with the emergence of numerous nuclear-armed powers, advanced military technologies, and unprecedented global interdependence, a global conflict would be more destructive than the two previous world wars. This article analyzes the catastrophic consequences that could occur if humanity were to face a third world war. If World War III broke out, the scale of casualties would surpass any previous conflict in history. World War II, the bloodiest conflict in history, recorded approximately 70 to 85 million dead, equivalent to about 3% of the world's population at the time. In a modern global conflict, this number could rise to hundreds of millions or even billions, depending on the extent of nuclear weapon use. Major cities, where the majority of the world's population is concentrated, would become primary targets. A modern nuclear bomb is many times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima, capable of completely obliterating a large city in an instant. Computational models suggest that a comprehensive nuclear exchange between major powers could result in 90% of the population in the warring nations perishing instantly or in the initial days. Even if the conflict does not escalate to the use of strategic nuclear weapons, modern conventional weapons systems possess unprecedented destructive capabilities. Hypersonic missiles, thermobaric bombs, kinetic energy weapons, and autonomous unmanned systems could inflict mass casualties with astounding precision. The environmental consequences of World War III could threaten the survival of Earth's entire ecosystem. In the event of a large-scale nuclear exchange, a nuclear winter phenomenon would ensue, with millions of tons of dust, ash, and smoke from explosions and resulting fires being injected into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight and reducing global temperatures by 7 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius for many years. Scientific studies indicate that even a limited nuclear war, such as a regional conflict between India and Pakistan involving around 100 nuclear weapons, could reduce global temperatures by 1 degree Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius over a decade and destroy the ozone layer, leading to increased harmful ultraviolet radiation. A full-scale conflict between major powers like the US, Russia, and China, with thousands of nuclear warheads, would have far more catastrophic environmental impacts. The sudden drop in temperature, combined with a 20 to 80% reduction in precipitation worldwide, would devastate agricultural production for many years. Crop failures would occur on a wide scale, particularly in temperate regions where most of the world's food is grown. Some estimates suggest that global food production could decrease by up to 90% in the years following the conflict, leading to unprecedented global famine in human history. Moreover, widespread radioactive pollution would render large areas uninhabitable or unusable for agriculture for many generations. Marine ecosystems would be devastated by temperature changes, increased ocean acidification, and radioactive contamination, threatening crucial protein sources for billions of people. The collapse of modern civilization, modern infrastructure, the foundation of industrial society, would be devastated in a global conflict. Power grids, telecommunications systems, internet infrastructure, oil and gas pipelines, and transportation networks would be destroyed or paralyzed on an unprecedented scale. In the digital age, large-scale cyber attacks could incapacitate essential infrastructure control systems even in areas not directly attacked. Global supply chains, which have become extremely complex and interdependent, would completely collapse. Modern economies, operating on a just-in-time principle with minimal reserves, are particularly vulnerable to large-scale disruptions. Modern cities often have food supplies lasting only 3 to 5 days. When cut off, famine would quickly spread even in wealthy nations. The global healthcare system would collapse under the burden of hundreds of millions of injured and diseased individuals, while medical facilities themselves would be destroyed or lack basic resources. Infectious diseases would spread uncontrollably in unsanitary conditions, without clean water and a collapsed public health system. New pandemics could emerge and spread among populations weakened by malnutrition and stress. On a broader societal scale, governance structures from local governments to international organizations would dissolve or become extremely weakened. Anarchy could spread in many areas, with armed groups vying for scarce resources. Knowledge and technology could be lost as educational infrastructure is destroyed and those holding expertise perish. Extremely severe economic downturn, the global financial system would collapse almost immediately as major financial centers are attacked directly or indirectly through cyber attacks. Currency values would become completely unstable, stock markets would crash, and the international banking system would cease operations. In this context, the nearly $100 trillion global economy could shrink by 80 to 90% within months. Industrial production would fall to a fraction of pre-conflict levels due to shortages of raw materials, energy, and labor. Industries dependent on scarce resources or components produced across multiple countries would cease entirely. Employment would disappear en masse, with unemployment rates potentially reaching 70 to 80% in many countries. A post-war economy, if it could recover, would revert to much simpler production models, focusing on basic agriculture and essential needs. Living standards would drop to pre-industrial levels in many areas, erasing 2 centuries of economic progress. Reconstruction, if feasible, would take decades or even centuries. The scale of the humanitarian disaster following World War III would exceed the capacity of any relief system. Hundreds of millions would become refugees, moving away from the most devastated areas in search of shelter, food, and water. However, these resources would be scarce even in areas less affected directly by the war. International humanitarian organizations, already overwhelmed in regional crises, would be unable to operate in a globally devastated context. Countries typically serving as aid providers would focus on the needs of their own populations. The healthcare system would be completely overwhelmed, lacking medicine, equipment, and medical personnel. Disease would spread rapidly in poor sanitary conditions and diminished nutrition. Controllable diseases such as cholera, typhoid, malaria, and tuberculosis would erupt into severe outbreaks. Hundreds of millions could perish from hunger and disease in the years following the conflict, far exceeding the direct casualties from military actions. The psychological impact of a catastrophic global war would affect all of humanity. Psychological trauma would become commonplace, with hundreds of millions witnessing the death of loved ones, losing property and communities, and facing extreme violence. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, could affect a majority of the surviving population. Civilization, as we know it, might be permanently altered. Many cultural heritages, including historical architecture, works of art, libraries, and museums, would be destroyed. As humans focus on basic survival, many complex cultural expressions might disappear. Fields such as music, art, literature, and entertainment would significantly narrow in scope and scale. Generations growing up during and after the conflict would have entirely different experiences compared to previous generations. Formal education would be disrupted or disappear in many areas, with the transmission of knowledge reverting to more basic forms, focusing on practical survival skills rather than academic knowledge. Threat to the survival of humanity in the most extreme scenario, World War III could threaten the very existence of humanity. Scientists have warned that a total nuclear war, combined with an ensuing prolonged nuclear winter, could push humanity to the brink of extinction or at least cause the collapse of modern civilization beyond recovery. Even if a portion of the population survives, the sudden population reduction, potentially up to 90% of humanity, would create a genetic bottleneck, significantly reducing human genetic diversity. This could weaken humanity's long-term adaptability to future environmental challenges. Furthermore, large-scale biodiversity destruction could lead to the mass extinction of many species, weakening ecosystems that humans depend on for survival. Processes like pollination, soil formation, and water cycling could be severely disrupted, further reducing the resilience of the remaining human communities. In the worst-case scenario, with large-scale nuclear weapons use and prolonged nuclear winter, survivors might be forced to revert to hunter-gatherer or primitive agricultural lifestyles. Industrial civilization as we know it might never be reconstructed, especially with many easily accessible resources already depleted in the modern industrial age. Analyzing the potential catastrophic consequences of World War III is not an exercise in apocalypse theory, but a powerful reminder of the importance of preventing such a conflict. As geopolitical tensions rise and military technologies advance, understanding what is at stake becomes more critical than ever. History has shown that major wars often originate from the escalation of smaller conflicts, strategic miscalculations, and diplomatic failures. In the nuclear era, such mistakes could be catastrophic, not only for the warring parties, but also for all humanity. Over 7 decades since nuclear weapons were last used in warfare, humanity has avoided another global conflict. Maintaining this record requires constant vigilance, wise diplomacy, and a deep understanding that in the modern world, with weapons of mass destruction, there can be no winner in a third world war. Only varying degrees of devastation and potentially the end of human civilization as we know it.